So again, thanks for having me. There's been a lot of kind words about GitHub today, so that's nice to hear. My friend Brandon over at DDS described himself as an odd duck with his background. Well, I'm the federal sales guy at GitHub, so think about how odd that must be. I'm the open source company representative to the most closed community in the world, the GitHub, the U.S. federal government. So it's odd. It's an interesting place to work, but a great technology and a great culture. When I hear citizen engagement, everybody looks at these types of things through their own lens, and given my background, I think collaboration and transparency as being two kind of core components to that, and I see a lot of things in play that are really good for us as a community, that are spurring these types of things that we just need to latch onto and make work for us. As I was looking into some of Mr. Bray's writings and kind of understanding his point of view on these topics, I read a great little quote about organizations aren't prone to change when things are going well. That makes all the sense in the world, right? We've heard lots of that from lots of folks today. Are things really going well around these things in the federal government overall? Are we really collaborating? Are we really transparent? There's tons of room for change and improvement, and I think that we're in the right place to do so if we take advantage of it. And I see things like the federal source code policy that's out now as being just a wonderful catalyst for change and openness and transparency. Folks that are kind of in tune with that just immediately hear open source, and that's not the case. That's not what it's there for. It's really about, that's part of it, right? It's about open source, but it's also about inner source. It's about taking the concepts of collaboration and open communication and bringing it within an agency. And it's code specific, obviously, but why the concepts aren't code specific? It's about taking ownership of what we as people through the federal government pay for and bringing it into the fold and being able to reuse it. It makes all the sense in the world, and folks that are latching onto this are going to see great success and have great results. So enough about that. Really, I'm here to introduce Mr. Bray, who is, his GitHub handle is at FCCDBray. So he's been a great proponent of all the topics that we're talking about here today. FCC's been great with collaboration. There's 90 plus open repositories on GitHub. They're doing wonderful work that's out in the open for everyone to see. And for everyone to comment on, and not just comment on, but participate in. I think that's the key. It's not just about having things be visible. It's about actual two-way communication and participation. Everyone knows that Mr. Bray is the CIO of FCC, but he's also recently been named the chair of the Federal Cloud Center of Excellence, run out of GSA, so that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. We've got an individual here with a why not attitude as opposed to something more restrictive. So it's going to be fun to see how that and other things play out. So without further ado, Mr. Bray. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So hello. I recognize that having just eaten, you have your serotonin levels going up in your brain, you have your stomach saying it's time to sleep, and my job is to wake you up. And what this conversation is going to be is actually going to be a little bit sort of provocative, because I'm going to give you the top 5 things that MBAs are not taught and how it relates to citizen engagement. Some of you may not know that actually in between my stint with the bioterrorism program at the CDC and then later deploying to Afghanistan, I did pursue a PhD in a business school and actually taught MBAs. And so I can say I've both been to a business school as well as taught MBAs, and so these are things that I think need to be shared because they color what we see in the world and what we miss when it comes to citizen engagement. So first I want to do a demonstration, and so I'm going to ask Anne over here, and if I had $100 in my hand, and that $100, you get to keep a percentage of it, and the remaining percent you are offering to Megan. But you both only get to keep it if Megan accepts your offer of a percentage. So this is what's called the bargaining game. For $100, how much of a percentage do you decide to offer Megan versus keep for yourself?
Well, can we negotiate?
Nope. Nope, no negotiations. It's a one-time game. Who would you want to make the deal with in this room?
Well, I just need to know.
Has to be Megan.
Okay. All right. I'll give Megan
20%. Megan, do you accept? All right, congratulations, Megan accepts. Okay, so that means you get $80, you get $20. So now I'm going to say that you're the boss. You're the chairwoman, you're the head of the organization. Megan's an intern that just arrived, and she's the upstart new. How much do you offer her now?
out of the
Same
same $100.
$100.
I would offer the
Same
same amount.
amount. Okay, Megan, do you accept? All right. Now let's say instead of it being $100, it's $1 million. We've gone up. How much of the $1 million, what percentage do you offer Megan? Recognizing if she doesn't accept, you get nothing. Still 20%. Megan, do you accept? All right. Well, congratulations. So what this showed, one, is that Anne is very consistent, which is good. Because usually when you increase the $1 million, people change their percentage. Right, because still, 5% of $1 million is a lot of money. The other thing is when you change the labels, people usually change, but Anne did not. But I share that because what would have economics said would have been the right amount for Anne to offer Megan? Nope. 1 penny. Because 1 penny is better than having nothing. Now, what would have been the rational offer for Megan to accept? Having a penny or having $1 is better than having nothing. But what we humans are is we have an innate sense of fairness that is not rational, because you knew at a certain point in time, if you went too low, Megan would reject that offer out of spite, even though having $5 or having $500 is better than having nothing. And in fact, this is actually something that's not unique to humans. Primates do it too. Primates don't really like cucumbers, but they'll eat them. And so you can give a monkey cucumbers and they'll eat them up into the point where they see another monkey in visual range getting bananas, at which point they will stop eating the cucumbers and throw them at the researchers. Which is not rational because it's food. But when they see that somebody else is getting something that's better, they reject it. And that's what you knew when you were making an offer to Megan, is you had to figure out at what point is she going to be okay with it, but it's just going to feel like it's not going to be unfair. And so why does this matter? Well, it matters because as our world goes from 7.3 billion people to 8 billion people, we've got some really thorny citizen engagement problems. First, in Russia, every winter, more than half of the country goes hungry. If you're wondering why you're seeing certain behaviors happening on the world stage from Russia, it's not about power ambitions. It's not about trying to take over things. It really is just simply they need a distraction from the fact that more than half of their country goes hungry every winter. And that's why about every August and September, whether it's Estonia, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Ukraine, they've got to create a spectacle so that people are not paying attention to the fact that they're going hungry. Second, China. We're now looking at upwards of about 33 million more males in that country than females because of the one-child policy. In fact, they've stopped doing it because they realized if they kept on doing this, it was going to diverge so far that you were going to have such a widespread more males than females that that was going to create regional instability. In Afghanistan, when I deployed there in 2009, the reality is the Taliban actually manipulate whether or not opium is something that is against the Quran or for the Quran to control the market. Back in the 1990s, they had a challenge of too many poppies were being produced. So they bought them all up, converted it to morphine base, which is stable for 15 years, and then they came out and said, you know, it's against the Quran. And they proceeded to sell it over the next 10 years at a profit because they had artificially limited the scarcity. And then they had a problem in which now they have a scarcity, there not being enough poppies being produced, and who should show up but now us, and they're saying, well, you know, it's being grown, but we need to actually target certain places where we don't want it grown. And so again, they manipulated the market through the narrative that was being shared. Not that this was actually an issue, but it was being shared, and we actually dedicated resources to it, because when we show up and try to burn the poppies, Guess who's increasing the profits for the drug? It's actually us. Arab Spring countries. Unfortunately, all of the Arab Spring countries that were involved with the quote-unquote Arab awakening, with the exception of Tunisia, are now worse off according to the World Bank, with the exception of Tunisia. And even Tunisia, in the last 3 years, has seen its social and economic status decline. And it may very well be in a year or two that essentially all of the countries involved with the Arab awakening are worse off than they were beforehand. Unfortunately, the internet is not the great liberating force that we seem to share. Instead, it actually allows you to target misinformation better so that you can create instability through it, as opposed to what we would like to have seen, which is what happened with the Berlin Wall that fell in 1989. It's worth asking, had the Berlin Wall not fallen in 1989 but fallen in 2009, would we have seen the same peaceful transition of both Germany and the rest of the Eastern Bloc countries over a 2-year period, or would things have been very similar to what we're seeing now in the world? And then finally, it has been well shown that if you have a youth bulge, if you get to about 9 to 15% unemployed youth that want jobs, you start to have local instability. If you get beyond 15% unemployed youth, you start to have regional instability. And this is happening specifically in Africa as well as in parts of South America. And it raises interesting questions because all of these eventually come to citizen engagement means what purpose, what meaning, what jobs are you as public service providing to people? So, when I was asked thinking about citizen engagement, I recognized that we have recently received a very strong signal from folks here in the United States, which is how are we going to address the question of creating jobs in this country? Because right now there are feelings that it's not equitably distributed. And so the first thing that, again, this demonstration was meant to show to you is economics is not a science. I apologize if anyone in this room is an economist, but it is based on 19th century predictions of how people behave when you could not know in real time their buying decisions, their economic decisions. And unfortunately, there is a great article from the Economic Review, 2001, that takes 10 classic predictions from game theory and then sees how people actually played a game. And turns out that game theory is 30% predictive of actual human behavior, which means it's wrong 70% of the time, which means you're better off flipping a coin. The challenge is we have based public policy in the West on something that is not a science. And now we are surprised when it's not working out well. Humans do not behave rationally, as I just showed to you. Actually, 1, Megan should have accepted every offer, and then 2, Anne should have offered just $1. But we have an innate sense of fairness, and that is something that has been recruited from us from our ancestral past, that essentially those primates that had a sense of fairness for whatever reason had a better evolutionary advantage than those who did not. But nowhere in economics do you have a sense of fairness into the calculus. This impacts what people are asking for. This is what people are hungry for around the world. And I think it explains some of the challenges we are now facing in 2017 with citizen engagement, is if they don't think like you're treating them fairly, they will become disengaged. They will become unstable. And that raises interesting questions about where we go. Now, it's not rational. I will agree with that economics is a great normative predictive of what you would behave if you were 100% rational. But it is intensely human to have a sense of fairness. Also, since the 1990s, it has been well documented what is called the IT productivity paradox. And what does this mean? It means basically for the amount of dollars we spend on increasing IT investments, we don't see the similar proportionate gain in productivity for GDP. Now, there's some that debate this, some that say it's a lag effect, that it's going to take longer to show up. Others say, well, you shouldn't be looking at productivity, you should be looking at convenience or other things. And other people say we're just measuring the wrong thing. But whatever the case is, this is one of the secrets that is not usually shared with MBAs, which is the amount that you spend on IT does not directly connect to an increase in GDP. And in fact, what I would put forward as my own prediction is IT is increasingly making us more distracted such that we're less productive. And that is a challenge because the really finite resource we have is our attention spans as humans. But whatever this is, this obviously needs to be addressed. All right, next. Economics assumes the planet has finite resources. Sorry, it assumes it has infinite resources, where you and I know that actually the planet has finite resources. In fact, predictions are right now we need about 9.3 Earths to match the same level of standard of living if everybody on the planet was to have the same median standard of living we had in the United States. Obviously, we can't do that. Now, yes, people will argue, well, space exists, and yes, there's infinite resources there as well, but I would say space is very difficult to get to. We've already heard back from NASA that unfortunately when an astronaut is in space for more than 6 months, they actually most of them will lose their ability to see well because of the vasculars in their eye. And so long-term space exploration for humans may happen, but we've got some major issues to address with our brain, with our eyes, and anything that involves liquids. And so we're not going to space anytime soon. And yet we're dealing with an economics that assumes infinite resources, and then we're surprised when the resources are scarce. Finally, and this is actually what I actually went to go back to show in 2005, 2008, and that's what led to me to deploy to Afghanistan, which is if you're trying to be top-down, which is what most MBAs are taught, most heads of public policy are taught, most managers are taught, direct your reports, tell them what to do. Make sure they're focusing on control and move things along. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do if the world is changing rapidly. You've got to be bottoms up. You've got to use your reports to actually serve as early indicators as to something's changing over here. Here's a new change we need to address. It needs to be much more bottoms up. But I would submit to you that we are teaching managers and we are putting in charge of companies people that are applying a top-down lens, and then they're surprised when it doesn't work. So for citizen engagement, this means we've got to think about how do we empower the edge? Recognize that there's many more citizens than there are people in government. They are the people that actually know what needs to work. They are the ones that know that needs to work in their context. How can they elevate that up to us so that we are not trying to be top-down in the world that's changing rapidly? So what does this mean for citizen engagement? First, unfortunately, the digital revolution, unlike past revolutions, allows you to see increased gains in productivity, increased gains in returns on investment without additional humans. Think for that about a minute. Yes, when we went from having horse-drawn carriages to cars, there were people that would put out jobs. You didn't no longer need the people to be the ones that would actually manufacture the horse-drawn carriages or drive them. But you would still need people to do the cars. But with the digital revolution, in which we're now looking at machine learning that can actually completely replace a human, you can actually have better productivity gains if no human is in the loop. That raises a very interesting question about where do we go going forward with citizen engagement, because if they feel like they can't get a job, no other additional citizen engagement, in fact, questions about why government and public service exist will be primal in their consciousness. Next up, we are at the low tide of globalization. Unfortunately, if you have a strong currency, which is what the United States does, your workers will not be able to compete with workers in other countries with low currencies or less strong currencies, because your currency basically outprices them from the market. Now, I don't think the solution is to devalue our currency. One, that's not really legal, and two, that would have other ripple down effects. But we need to recognize that the frustration in the heartland stems from we've got a strong currency, we've done globalization, but nobody's actually addressed the fact that then that means they cannot compete when the tide is low. And unfortunately, what will eventually happen is, yes, in time, globalization will raise the value of currencies of other countries that are less strong at the moment. But I think that's going to happen exactly at the same time when the tsunami of automation is going to hit. And again, people that are used to doing manufacturing jobs will be asking, what am I going to be doing next? And this is why it's primal to citizen engagement, because any additional things that we ever hope to do with the public first build on, how are you meeting my purpose in life? How are you meeting the job that I want to have? So, lastly, jobs manage immensely. In fact, there's actually been shown repeatedly in the American Medical Journal that's what's called the unemployment effect. When you are unemployed, your health goes down individually, your relationships with your family and health goes down, your relationship to the community goes down, oftentimes you turn to devices and drugs. This is actually, even when people are retired, they still like to find advocations, even if they're not getting paid for a job. Because again, for whatever reason, in the past, those ancestors, when we were primates, that had a sense of purpose, that looked for that sense of purpose and found meaning in doing something, were the ones that were more likely to pass their genes on than those who didn't. We humans have to have a purpose. It is core to our being. It's core to our meaning. And the question is, in a world in which we don't need people to be employed because things are being automated, what responsibility do we have to them to address that gap? Anybody know what this is a picture of? Printing press, yes, and I'm glad people in the media would know, else I'd be kind of concerned. But I raise that because the next question is, anybody know what this is a picture of? This is actually a picture of the internet. This is 2014, so it's grown since then. This is just land-based line connections around the world. They gave up trying to actually show it on a map. But should we not be surprised that when the printing press came out, it distributed information, it challenged existing institutions, and about 200 years later, we had the Treaty of Westphalia that recognized the sovereignty of nation states over other types of institutions. It changed how people organized. So should we not be surprised that the internet, very much like the printing press, is challenging existing institutions in how we organize? Should we not be surprised that it will give way to new ways of human beings organizing and new ways of working together? And so I'd submit to you that that's what you're seeing right now, is the challenge that is questioning, in the world we're going forward in the future, is it best organized by geography? Is it best organized by ideology? Is it best organized by corporation? Is there some other way of organizing humans that is more beneficial, that is being triggered from what the internet provides? So job creation matters. Hopefully I've convinced you of that. And what I want to share with you now is things that we need to be conscious of when we do citizen engagement. And the first is, a minimal salary will not work in a world of scarce resources. You already see this actually being tried on in certain countries where they're saying, well, okay, so automation is going to happen. We're not going to need everybody to work. We'll provide a minimal salary. And that would work great if you had infinite resources. But if you have scarce resources, guess what the price of those scarce resources is going to be? Slightly more than a minimal salary. Now, what I have seen in certain countries is they are playing around with the idea that maybe food is not a scarce resource anymore. In fact, we do destroy some food here in the United States to help with price adjustments. And so actually on that front, maybe you actually say, instead of giving you a minimal salary, I give you a minimal food credit card that you can use to purchase just food. And that way you can at least have your food needs met. But that doesn't address things such as energy. It doesn't address things like real estate. And it doesn't recognize that eventually only so many people can live next to the Potomac River. But I raise that because these are conversations that are happening on the West Coast. These are conversations that are happening around the world, and we need to actually figure out what is the science we need to do to actually see what is the best path. But I would personally say that this one would only work if you have infinite resources, which we don't. So I don't recommend that path. Second, it does pose the ability for us to all work less hours, and I'm pretty sure all of us would like to work less hours. In fact, probably all of us in this room work more than a 40-hour week. And probably the reason why we do is we don't want to lose our job. Well, that's happening not just here in the United States, it's happening around the world, that people that want to hold on to their job feel like they have to work more than 40 hours a week. In fact, the United States has seen its productivity increase probably because we've all felt compelled to work more than 40-hour weeks. Now, if we could get every country in the world to agree to work less hours, maybe just do a 6-hour day week, that said, it would only work if everybody agreed. If any one country decided to defect, their economy will go up great, and the rest of us will hurt. So this is a collective action problem, which I'm not sure can be solved through global means. But we have to think about, yes, it would be nice if we had less work hours, that we could spend more time with family and friends. We still have some purpose, but it's not consuming all our lives. But we have to recognize that will only work if we all agree to it. If we reduce just our hours and nobody else does, our economy will tank. Next up, the sharing economy. I'm a big fan of it. But you have to recognize that once it's automated, we're going to have, the estimates are there's right about 7 million people that are just involved with transportation of goods. And once you have that automated, guess what? Those goods will not involve a human in the loop. Same thing is true for taxi cab drivers. Same thing is true for UPS drivers. We're going to face probably about upwards of 10 to 15 million people that will be looking for work in a country of about 300 million. That's a big challenge. We also have to recognize the fact that currently the estimates are about 50% of the jobs in the next 5 years will have some degree of automation put into them. So you maybe be able to do more with less people. And so the question is, how do we make sure we don't go to a future in which the sharing economy, which is great on the initial surface, ends up creating a whole lot of serfs, and we actually find out we've unintentionally gone to neo-feudalism without any conscious deliberation about where we were going? That, to me, is a question that we need to ask as well when we talk about citizen engagement. As I already mentioned, the unemployment effect, huge issue that we've got to face. What is our obligations for addressing that? Because people do need to have a sense of purpose. And this actually gets to the whole question of public service. And I say the word public service versus government because I want to submit to you that government is a 20th century term that's increasingly out of date. Communication between Topeka, Kansas and Washington, D.C. is no longer 4 days on horseback. It's now milliseconds. How many of you have a device in your pocket or on your table that allows you to reach anybody in the United States at the whim? Probably most of you do. That didn't exist 15 years ago for most people. And so we can rethink how we do things, and maybe things are done directly by the public, maybe things are done directly by public-private partnerships or by government professionals, but it's not something that's exclusively the domain of government. And so when we think about citizen engagement, we've got to think about all three. What things are done to address unemployment by the public, what things are done by public-private partnerships, and what things are done by government. The middle class in the United States has been shrinking since 1979. And this is not to debate why, but this is basically just to say that it has been shrinking and continues to shrink. And when a middle class shrinks, you have less people able to buy certain goods and certain services, and markets start to shrink. And so a shrinking middle class relates to shrinking markets. Shrinking markets then also mean that eventually you're going to have a very interesting challenge where maybe no one else can afford the goods going forward. And I share this because there are some people that are not concerned about a shrinking middle class. I would submit to you, you should be, because if you want to grow your market, you do want a larger middle class than a shrinking one. So, how do we address this in terms of 2017? And now that I've sort of hopefully not made you completely terrified about the world we're going to, or what is the hope that we have going forward? Well, first, interestingly enough, again, economics was created at a time in which you could not know in near real time the economic buying decisions of everybody on the planet. But now you can. Artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, we now can actually instrument and see what are the buying decisions, what are the job-seeking behaviors, what are the things that people are thinking about as it relates to these certain topics. And so we can actually develop a science that is empirically based as opposed to anecdote-based as to how do we create jobs going forward. You can bet that Amazon, Google, Facebook, and other companies, they are trying to nudge you into certain behaviors. And they have this analytics. And so if we think about this as a grand challenge for both our nation and the world, it could be a way of actually embracing this and saying, look, let's get over the fact that economics is not a science. Let's actually think about how we can make things evidence-based. And we want to figure out how best to deal with a world in which automation is happening, globalization is happening. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, but we ideally want to figure out a way that has the best equitable outcomes for as many people as possible. So, next question. Well, there have been talks about the need for predictive intelligence, anticipatory intelligence, things like that policymakers don't want to just be told what happened. They want to be able to forecast the impact of their policy decisions. And right now we don't have that. And so the question then is, how do we actually do R&D as to how to better model individuals and groups and to bring them together so that we can actually figure out how best to move them forward? And so this actually raises a question about, we have a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, so we have a DARPA. But where is the civilian counterpart? If we wait for things to trickle down to the civilian agencies, that's too late in a rapidly changing world. So where are the safe spaces where maybe we can identify 3 top priorities that are challenges that span across agencies, that span across local, state, and federal, and see if we can bring in people from the public, from the private sector, from government, to tackle these really hard challenges and base it more on how we actually see job creation done for individuals and groups versus anecdotes. Then lastly, we've got to turn to the public. We can't try to solve the challenges as we normally do, which is in the bubble known as Washington, D.C. We've got to actually get out there and say we have a real challenge with the unemployment effect. We have the real challenge with global job creation. And see if people have interesting ideas. They will surprise you. The reality is a diversity of perspectives, but we've got to own it and we've got to recognize we will not probably solve it here in D.C. But what we can do is be that broker that says, how do we solve this challenge? Because if we don't, I would submit to you, we will have regional instability, we will have national instability, and eventually global instability. So supposedly when the Constitution was signed, Ben Franklin is rumored to have said that he could rest easy knowing the great American experiment could continue to exist for the next 50 years. Now, that was obviously 240 years ago, but it's great that he used the word experiment because expertise and experiment both have the same word experia, meaning out of danger. And that the only way you get expertise is you do dangerous things. And so this again raises the question as to where in public service are we doing those experiments to address the challenges of automation, to address the challenges of job creation and globalization. Because if we're not doing those dangerous things that won't always work out, we're not going to have the expertise needed for the decade ahead. And I also want to end you with an interesting note, which is when I was in Afghanistan, and actually even before that when I responded to 9/11, I shared a poem called If by Kipling. And I want to share it with you, and I want to update it for the 20th century. So this was written in 1895. Think about it, more than 100 years ago. And it begins with, if you can keep your head about you, when all are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men and women doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. And if you can get a battery for the dying remote control. I think it just died. There we go. If you can wait but not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, yet don't talk too good, nor talk too wise. And now to update it for the 21st century. If you can serve multiple issues, including the greater good, though none may notice what you endure. If you can innovate shared solutions, so that together we could choose to make our world prosperous, free, and secure. And again, if you can embody what we the people stands for, choices and compromises, both recognized as central, then yours is an internet society's truly great endeavor, promoting courage, creativity, and ideas from us all. We're going to need more change agents going forward. Hopefully I've given you a little bit of challenges as well as a little bit of hope, and I think I'm available for maybe one more question, one or two.
Yep. You raise your hand, we'll bring a mic to you if you have a question. My goodness, you've told them everything they need to know.
There's a question.
Which agency and how do you think it would be the best way to go about trying to build that challenge space to get those questions from across the agencies and from the public answered?
Yeah, so I think it has to be something that is set almost as a partnership between public service and the public directly. And so I would say probably OMB would need to foster a place, and that could be a place that is co-located with the existing DARPA, or they could use existing structures. There are several things that could be repurposed. There's a thing called networking IT R&D, which people may or may not know about, which is supposedly $3 billion a year to encourage government adoption of the internet. I think we can plant that flag and say, mission accomplished. Something like that could be repurposed, and that way it's a no increase. It's just saying we now have new challenges. But things like that, I think it had to be OMB sort of directed. They find a place that can host it. They find a source of money. And then it's no one agency because these things cut across agencies. And it's also not just federal. It's state and local. And it's also then inviting and saying, we really want to see possible solutions from the public, possible solutions from the private sector. But if we don't address the issues of job creation, automation, and globalization, I don't look forward to the decade ahead. Is there another question? No one else is. Hopefully I didn't offend any economists in the room, but.
All right, thank you. I think you gave them a lot to think about.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.